Yes. I'm Helen Phelan, one of the founders of the Deccan Heritage Foundation, and would like to welcome you all, welcome all participants to today's fascinating presentation by Dr. Tiziana Lorenzetti. Dr. Lorenzetti graduated from the University of Rome La Sapienza, where she obtained her PhD in History of the Art of India and Oriental Asia from the University of Genoa in Italy. She was postdoctoral fellow at the National Museum Institute of the History of Art in New Delhi and lecturer in Indian art and culture at the Sapienza in Rome. She is now director of the International Institute of South Asian Studies. Her publications are varied and include Understanding the Hindu Temple, History, Symbols and Forms, Studies in the Asian Art and Culture, Berlin, 2015, Hindu Sculpture, Religion, Mythology and Art at the Ecological Museum of Khajuraho, and Voices of Freedom, Society, Culture and Ideas in the 70th year of India's independence. Her lecture today will address the early history of the Vīraśaiva Liṅgāyat movement, an innovative religious movement during the 12th century and later in Karnataka and East Deccan. Their religious role and their economic activities brought social changes in the Deccan, themes that will have lasting effects in the Deccan. After her lecture, she will be joined by Professor Julia Hegewald for a discussion on Jainism and the Liṅgāyat. And then, of course, there will be questions and answers that the moderator will be Dr. Vivek Gupta. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next lecture, which will be the reverse. It will be Professor Hegewald will give the lecture, and Dr. Lorenzetti and her will have a discussion before we join them for the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen Phelan, for this kind presentation. And thank you to the Deccan Heritage Foundation for this invitation. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I would like to dedicate my talk to Professor Kalburgi from the Karnataka University, who shared with me his vast knowledge on Liṅgāyats. Kalburgi, unfortunately, was assassinated in 2015. So let's go back to the talk, which is dedicated to him. In the 12th century Karnataka, a new religious tradition arose, and even today, although scarcely known, it is prominent in Southern Deccan, not only in Karnataka, but in Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and now in Tamil Nadu also. I found a number of Liṅgāyats. It was the Vīraśaiva creed, or Vīraśaiva means heroic Shaiva, also known as Liṅgāyat creed. The name Liṅgāyat can be translated as one who has taken to the Linga. Indeed, all the followers carry on their body, usually around the neck, a tiny linga enclosed, can you see, in a tiny, small silver box. The tiny linga is sold, but the guru, the Liṅgāyat guru, blesses it and bestows it upon the devotee with a ceremony. The two denominations, Vīraśaiva and Liṅgāyat, are both equally frequent in common use, as I am doing in this talk. Maybe it is not completely correct, but the boundary between the two is not clear. A number of scholars even believe that the Liṅgāyats and the Vīraśaivas are two different groups belonging to different traditions, which later blended together. Indeed, the early history of the Liṅgāyat movement is not clear, and there are certain theories about the origin. The most popular one is that the reputed founder of the tradition was a certain Vāsava, born at the beginning of 12th century in a city of northern Karnataka. Here you can see the image of Basava. In all Vīraśaiva math, the Vīraśaiva community is organized in a system of math or school and monastery-like institutions. At the entrance, there is an image of Basava. According to the sources, Basava was born in a Brahmanic family, but it is narrated that already as a child, he refused to undergo all the rituals that characterizes the Brahmanical way of life. Later, Basava left his hometown and took up residence in a sacred site called the Sangam. Sangam means meeting, union, at the confluence of two rivers, the Krishna and the Malaprabha. The local deity here was Shiva Sangameshvara, Shiva, the Lord of the meeting rivers. And it is said that as soon as Basava came into the temple, he was overwhelmed by emotion. And today, in this place, we can see the funerary memorial of Basava dedicated to his samadhi. Indeed, in Kudala Sangama, he achieved his samadhi. He lived there, absorbed in devotion towards the God, in tune with the sentiment of bhakti that had already spread in all India. With the bhakti movement, he had in common universal openness, whereby the conviction that all devotees, regardless of social class or gender, may aspire to a direct experience of the divine. Like many bhakti poets, Basava used the spoken tongue of the country, the Kannada, not the Sanskrit. And by the way, he composed his poems after a new expressive code, Vachana, characterized by a linear and essential prose suitable to the comprehension of everyone. However, there were also points of divergence with respect to the Bhakti movement. While Bhakti devotional practice made use of cult images, Basava rejected images in all forms, considering them nothing more than superstition. He wrote with a certain humor, gods, 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 there are so many, there is no place left for a foot. Basava rejected also the fundamental cornerstone of the Hindu milieu. Indeed, at the very beginning, the Liṅgāyatism, Vīraśaivism, was regarded by the Hindus as a dangerous innovation. The idea of Basava were regarded as dangerous, very against the tradition, the Hindu tradition. The opposition of the worship of God and votive images led to rejecting of kind of rituals, rejection of temples construction, with the exceptions of funerary memorials we have seen, samadhi, opposition to religious symbols with exceptions of the linga. Contrary to the Hindu Brahmanic tradition, in the Liṅgāyat belief, the symbol of linga is in any way connected to the creative divine energy of God Shiva, or with the multiplicity of the Hindu God. The Liṅgāyat linga is nothing more than the symbol of the only one divine principle, devoid of any form. We can say something so universal consciousness. Since Basava opposed to the erection of altars and temples, the linga, as we have seen, is worn on the body of the devotee. It is the sign that the divine does not reside in ordinary temples, but in the center of man, himself regarded as the temple. Thus, Vīraśaivas advocated a return to a metaphorical correlation between the temple and the human body, which had already been expressed in certain Bhakti literature, but also in a lot of texts of architecture. Vīraśaivas wrote a famous poem, "My legs are pillars, the body is the shrine, the head is cupola. Listen, O Lord of the meeting rivers, things standing shall fall, but the ever-moving shall stay." He wrote in his famous Vachana. There is also one more significant for the fact that the linga is worn on the body of all devotees. It is also an emblem of equality of all the devotees. And more important is any person could be accepted into the Vīraśaiva community. Any person, whatever castes, whatever gender. Now, let's speak about the object of worship. Of course, we have seen the main object of worship is the linga. But linga is closely linked to the guru, the master, and to Jangamana, the moving one. In the writing of Vīraśaivas is quoted very often that Jangamana is the enlightened sage who has turned himself into a moving temple, realizing the total fusion with the linga. And with time, their sandals, the sandals of the Jangamana, the guru, became object of cult. We can see here in the Mata of Kopal, this devotee is worshipping, is bowed to the sandals of the last guru of the Mata. And when they leave the Jangamana and the guru, the physical body, their footwear were usually placed on their very samadhi. Here, you can see the samadhi of the last guru of the Vīraśaiva community in Gojanur. Here the sandals, and in connection, there is the image of the linga. Now, the guru Jangamana footwear are placed and worshipped not only at samadhi, but also in the mata themselves. Inside the mata, there is the sandals, are worshipped the sandals, and the guru, and the linga. We have already seen that at the beginning, Vīraśaiva Liṅgāyat system was seen as by the Hindu as a dangerous innovation. But how is Vīraśaivism, Liṅgāyatism considered now in relation to the larger Hindu tradition? The Liṅgāyat movement with time is often considered to be a sort of a Hindu sect. We know there are many Hindu sects, and Vīraśaivism is considered one of these Hindu sects. However, we have seen there are many diversities with the Hindu milieu, at least at the beginning, stressed by a number of scholars, including the late Kalburgi. Because of these very many diversities, let me make a brief parenthesis on the contemporary situation. Precisely 4 years ago, the Liṅgāyat in India demanded a separate religious status. And finally, this March 2022, the Karnataka government recognized Liṅgāyats as a separate religious minority. Here we can see this photo from the Indian Express last March, in which the Swami of the Kudala Sangama Mat and his followers celebrating the decision of the Karnataka government. The central government has still to pronounce itself on the matter. We don't know if the central government will accept the separate religious status of the Liṅgāyat. Indeed, Liṅgāyatism can be considered a real innovation and greatly influenced the society of the 12th century South Deccan, contributing to create a new social progress. Here are certain principles established by BASBA. The tendency towards equality did not remain limited to religious domain, as it extends also to the social sphere, giving rise to a battle against the caste system. Democratic principles aimed at removing social inequalities reflected in the institution of Anubhava Mantapa, experience pavilion, a public religious assembly open to everyone, included women. Redistribution of wealth, which is to say that every working person was to utilize part of his earnings for the sustenance of the community, particularly the neediest classes. In this way, work became a social service. The name is Kayaka. Work, the word Kayaka is a Sanskrit adjective meaning corporal, related to the body. And of course, there is an re-evaluation of the manual labor. And this led to revaluation, but also connect the work, any kind of work, to a form of devotion. Since any kind of work could be undertaken according to free choice and not as in the Hindu milieu determined by birth, the Vīraśaivas faithful may be due also to the fact that the Kayaka principle had removed the social inhibition, made the best use of professional opportunities, thus undertaking a wide variety of profitable occupation. And maybe for this reason, for this social mobility, a number of conversion from Hindus and also from Jains to Liṅgāyat faith took place. So it was very important, this social mobility inside, within the Liṅgāyat belief. Among the very many occupations, mainly there was a trade. Liṅgāyat were mainly merchants, and trade was a long-standing activity central to the local economy of the Deccan. We know commercial exchanges had been taking place ancient times, not only between the south and the north of India, but also overseas. We can see also through the West, and the Roman Empire also was involved in this trade. And South India has always been known for its raw materials, precious stones, and above all, the abundance of spice. We know cinnamon, turmeric, pepper, ginger, and so on. They were very much requested by Europeans, not only to flavor dishes, but also for food preservation and for medicinal purpose. In this regard, it is interesting to note that the Portuguese surgeon and physician Cristoforo Agosta of the 16th century wrote an interesting treatise about the medical health properties of precisely of the Deccan spices. An interesting book illustrated in a very wonderful way is now preserved in Italy, in Rome, at the Angelica Library, the most ancient European public library. To come back to trade, the 12th century Deccan witnessed a spurt in commercial activity. With the progressive decline of the traditional economy of exchange and the rise of a monetary system, trade and business flourished. The revival of trade, along with the idea of work as a social service and the feeling of individual freedom, inspired by Vāsava teaching, encouraged the Vīraśaiva traders, who played an important part in economic development of Karnataka. In this map, you can see the very many trade routes through the Deccan, and the Vīraśaiva merchants, of course, used this trade route, and also they built more trade routes. In the 12th century Deccan, mercantile groups were divided on the basis of local interest. Vīraśaivas merchants formed a united group, ever more powerful, and according to Vāsava principles, since part of their earnings were devolved to the community for the welfare of the people, they formed a new code of commercial morals called Vira Vanij Dharma, the law of the noble merchants. We can also find the word Banya, Banjan, merchant, or Banya. It is an expression used widely in the Indian Ocean trade to refer to Indian merchants. Maybe it derived from the Sanskrit word Vanij, merchant. For the public welfare, Vīraśaiva were very active, especially in the field of healthcare. Till today, next to the Vīraśaiva mat, we generally find doctors offering their service at a small stand of medicines, or large hospitals full of treatment and medicines, mostly, of course, taken from vegetables. And the medicines are generally the Ayurvedic one, but also the Unani medicines, Persian, Arabic traditional medicines, as practiced by Muslim, of course, was practiced as the 14th century. Part of the Deccan came under the Bahmani Sultanate and then under the 5 later sultanates. And under their rules, certain elements of Vāsava's legacy, such as the public health care, continued, thus contributing to the creation of polyvalent society in which different ideas and traditions could coexist. The Vīraśaiva were not the only traders in the Deccan. There were also Muslim, Shaivas, and particularly Jain merchants who for centuries has controlled the business in the area. Conflict between all the trading religious groups rose from commercial competition, but not only. Late Indian Middle Ages, particularly in the Deccan, have been characterized by violent inter-religious contrasts, in particular between the Shaivas, the Vīraśaiva, and the Jains. Conspicuous body of historical sources, including reliefs, documents such clashes, even admitting the possibility, of course, of hagiographic or narrative exaggerations. Here in the first image, we can see the Vīraśaivas fighting against the Jains, represented, defeated, lying on the ground. There are the images of Jains. In the other image, both are still unpublished. We can see the two heroes, warriors, the name are Gomma and Macca. Kalburgi was so kind enough to translate for me the inscriptions above. I don't know if you can see. And in the inscriptions written that the two warriors, Gomma and Macca, fought and died in battle for their king, who was Simahana from the Yadava dynasty. They were in the 14th century the feudatory of the Western Chalukya, and so the inscription says that they fought very brave, and they defend the villages, and you can see the women and the cattle, and so they died in battle. Particularly violent were the struggles between the Jains and the Vīraśaivas. Here, a Vīraśaiva hero, from the inscription we know that the name was Ramaya, and his warriors are destroying Jina images, you can see, at Someshvara temple in Bangalore. Moreover, we have to point out one interesting fact. The Vīraśaivas not only destroyed the Jain statues and temples, group of Vīraśaivas already by the demise of Basava, notwithstanding they shouldn't provide for the rising of temple, started to appropriate temples that had belonged to other religious communities, particularly Jain, and reused them, practicing here there certain rituals similar to the Brahmanical. This attitude was partially due to certain fundamental changes in the Liṅgāyat religiosity, but not only. The matter still deserves an in-depth study. The struggle and the interrelation between the Vīraśaivas and the Jains and their effect on artistic, religious and political expressions are very interesting, and Professor Julia Egewald will be treating the matter in the following lecture. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lorenzetti. Now we will have Professor Hegewald respond with some questions and engage you. So I welcome Professor Hegewald to speak.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tiziana. What a wonderful presentation. Really, really interesting and fascinating for my research in many ways and respects. And this is why we have always been in touch over the last years, as our work is so closely related. So I'm really, really pleased to react and to see so many people online. We have had 81 participants a little while ago. It comes and goes, so well done. I'm really pleased that there's such an interest. I would like to come back to a topic which is really fascinating for me too, this rejection of worshipping figural images in the Liṅgāyat or Vīraśaiva religion, which is unusual for Bhakti movements, and often, as you said, explained with rejecting superstitions, and of course the fact that the emphasis is on the linga carried around the neck, as you showed in much detail. Now, I'm wondering this choice of the linga, and I know that elsewhere you argue that the meaning of the linga with the Vīraśaivas and with, let's say, mainstream Shaivism, if that exists, is very different. But if the intention of Basava was to create a new religion, it's quite striking that he chose an already existing symbol. Do you think this indicates that he wanted more of a reform of Shaivism, or is it a personal choice of, his love for Shiva at Sangameshvara what do you think? You know what I mean? This kind of emphasis on the linga as an existing symbol when you try to create something, a distinct religion possibly.
Yes, thank you, Julia, for your question. It's really a difficult question because Basava didn't write some things about this, but he only pointed out that the linga is not the Shivaism linga, is devoid of any form, is not connected in any way to the multiplicity of the God. I think that he got the symbol because, as you mentioned, at the beginning, he felt a devotion to the Shiva Sangameshvara, but his experience was a mystical experience. So I think detached from the tradition, Hindu tradition. He got the symbol, but he reused the symbol in a different way, as divided of any form, and the only principle, the only principle.
Yeah.
Indeed, the Liṅgāyat linga is the form also is different from the linga of the Hindu tradition. There is in any way connected with the meaning of the form of the phallus. Is different. It's like a ball.
Yeah.
It's more like a ball.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's very good to point out. Thanks. Now, even more striking then, which I will show more examples of next week, is then this reuse, which you mentioned, the reuse of Jain figures, of footprints by the Vīraśaivas. I found it often very difficult to interact, to get a response from Vīraśaivas in explaining why they are doing this, what meaning these kind of absorbed images, which don't really make a sense from within the new tenets of their religion, make. I wondered whether you had more information on this reception of explaining, of reasoning. I mean, is it just a political statement, which is, I mean, they keep the images, don't they? I mean, they are still there today. If it was just in the initial phase of aggression, it's maybe easier to understand than today. Do you have any further information on that from your research in a Vīraśaiva context?
Julia, do you mean that why the Vīraśaiva now use images?
Yeah.
I also asked it to them.
Yes.
And, of course, they didn't reply because for them it is normal, is natural. Yeah. But I can tell you one thing, unfortunately. Professor Kalburgi was really against this kind of attitude, and there were a group of Liṅgāyat. Kalburgi used to call them pure Liṅgāyat, who were very attached to the original thought of Basava, and they didn't worship. They don't, I think till now, don't worship any images. And there was a fight between the Liṅgāyat, and I think personally, and some other people think that Kalburgi was assassinated because he was so against this kind of attitude that came later, not so later, but after the demise of Basava, certain, for many reasons, including the pressure of the Hindu milieu and the converters, because there were a lot of conversion from Hindu and Jain and Kalamuka to the Liṅgāyat faith, started started to worship, the Liṅgāyat started to worship images, Hindu images, and also they reused, appropriated the temples belonging to different traditions. It was,
I don't know, Helen has raised her hand. Is it exactly to this? Helen, do you want to jump in, or should I continue? And
no, you continue.
Okay, great. We'll keep your mind. No, great. It's I've also found it difficult to get answers, but that really helps. You quoted this fascinating Vachana 820, which ends with this sentence, "Sing standing, shall fall," which I found so yeah, it's
very powerful.
Very powerful. I've often thought about how, I mean, we can again only speculate, but from your knowledge of the Vīraśaivas, I wondered, I mean, Basava probably refers to changes in the social structure, in the religion and the approach, but I wondered whether it could also be read more literally, and whether he might actually here invite people or demand even that what we know happened, that temples are falling, are taken down. How far would you go? Do you think it's more allegorical, a change in religion statement, or is it more practical? As you know, you said the Vīraśaivas, the heroic, the militant Shaivas. How far would you go in your interpretation?
Julia, I don't know. I think it's more practical, because the Liṅgāyat part is devotional and practical part, more than philosophical
Yeah.
one. And so, and also, Sanskrit was not completely rejected. No, because after Basava, many Liṅgāyat masters referred to Sanskrit works as a work of important works. So it's not completely, it's not, it was some things new, but it didn't want to create a fracture with the previous Hindu tradition.
Okay, great. Yeah, good. I know we're running out of time, but maybe just a last quick question. I hope an easier one. I didn't really want to ask complicated questions.
Yes, go for it,
so
please.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And that is with regard to the trade, the importance of trade, and the Vīraśaivas becoming so important in trade. And you explained very well that it partially has to do with their kind of view of work and trade as a kind of religious service, and of kind of public welfare, which kind of supports this spread. But I've never really understood how the Jainas, who were so important in trade before, and to a certain extent still are today, how this switch happened. Was this, you know, the switch from the Jainas dominating in trade, and then the Vīraśaivas becoming so important? Because in a way, the Vīraśaivas do not come in from the outside, but they are kind of within the community already. It's a kind of, is it your understanding that it is largely the Jainas converting? So the Jaina merchants who become Vīraśaiva merchants? Or is it that the Jainas are really kind of marginalized, and that the Vīraśaivas flower and gain influence? And then I wonder how that was done. Is that something you have thought about? I know they're very specialized questions, but which have always troubled me, kind of.
I think, Julia, both.
Both.
Both conversions
Yeah.
Then the Jains at that time were losing power. Losing power not only not because of the Liṅgāyat themselves, but because the history, the Jain struggle against the Jain and Hindu struggle, and they lose the patronage, and so there was a number of reasons. Including conversions, and then we have to understand that this new moral law of the merge, the Vīraśaiva merge, was very successful because it's very, very united and very powerful, and they attracted a lot of people. Not only, and especially the neediest classes, because a part of their earnings have to be devoted for the neediest classes. So they were very powerful. And I think, Julia, that both happens. Conversions as this new moral code that was very successful in Karnataka.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I could go on forever, but I'll hand over to Helen and Vivek to let some other people ask, and we'll continue privately. It was really fascinating. Thank you so much. Really enlightening paper.
We're very lucky to have both of you engaging with each other. And then next week, we will have the reverse. No, in 2 weeks, we'll have the reverse, which is great. So Helen has a question.
Do you think it could also be the change in the political environment of the Deccan when the Muslims come to set and establish themselves in the Deccan, where there were a more egalitarian approach, and an approach also that doesn't relate. The Vīraśaivas do not relate to the main Hindu religions, Jainism and Hinduism, but is more of a vernacular sect belief, and therefore perhaps less threatening to the new conquerors. Is it possible that that's the time when, in fact, the Liṅgāyats begin to take over the commercial environment of the Deccan, and the Jains are the ones that are the more well established, are beginning to lose their power in favor of another sect? I think that there might be some connection between the political changes, the role of the Vīraśaivas, who are more closer, let's say, to the popular beliefs, and much more egalitarian. So perhaps all this has something to do, and therefore encouraging the Liṅgāyats to become much more important in the commercial environment, which was, of course, needed by all political leaders, and at a time, especially when you have droughts and upon droughts, and all these special medicines and herbs and things they bring, which are so good for one's health and well-being, become increasingly important.
Yes. Thank you, Helen, for this important question. Of course, in time, the Vīraśaiva, they contributed to the creation of a polyvalent society, and they influenced also the policy. In this polyvalent society, different ideas and traditions could coexist. And indeed, when in the subsequent kingdoms, Islamic to Bahmani sultanates, the different ideas of the Liṅgāyat coexisted. Indeed, the key feature of these sultanates were the multiplicity. They influenced a lot the kingdom and the policy of the realms. At the beginning, the Hindu, the Vīraśaivas, and then 2 centuries later, the Sultanates. And this can be seen also in the architecture style that show a culture where local and imported ideas are fused and reinterpreted to create majestic architectural heritage. And another important fact is that the Vīraśaivas always worked in conjunction with the governors or king, or because they proposed because their dharma, to devolve part of earnings for the wealth of the people, they proposed to the king or to the sultans to promote work for the goods, the common goods. And interesting, there is an inscription of the 14th century that reads that in Mysore, in the district of Konkan, there were at that point a scarcity of water, and which was very bad for agriculture. And the Vīraśaiva merchants and Vīraśaiva followers went to the king, Bukka Budayar, and asked the permission to build and to realize a water channel that is still there. So really they worked in conjunction with the power. Muslim or Hindu doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's true. Never done.
Professor Lorenzetti, I have a question for you. So I've always been struck by how the cases, the Liṅgāyat, the actual objects evoke architecture. And I wonder how, has there been any study of the actual Liṅgāyat object, these sort of small boxes that hold the linga? I think that in the absence of any sort of textual evidence, or we might be able to get something out of these physical objects, but I wonder whether you've done any work on this, whether this is a subject that is even possible to study, given the sources, but it's a question that I have.
Sorry, can you repeat slowly the question? I am so sorry.
So my question is about the actual physical Liṅgāyat, the linga.
The tiny linga inside the box. Okay.
Yeah, but also the box itself.
Oh, okay.
So I'm wondering whether or not has there been a study of these boxes, of the linga boxes, to demonstrate or to look at how they transform what you can understand based on the actual object.
There are a lot of different kind of box.
Okay.
There are silvers, and there are silver with little gold, or there are more poor materials. It depends on the people. And of course, the box also is important for them. And so they worshipped the linga inside, they open the box, they put the linga on the palm of the hand, and there is a kind of meditation. But the box is still very important because the body is the body and the soul, no? So they worship also the boxes, because the boxes is also blessed by the guru.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Valerio has his hand up. Valerio, could you please ask your question?
My name is Olaf, and like Dr. Gupta, I'm also from India. So I was very fascinated. Well, I know Tatiana and Julia also. So greetings to both of you. and also to Dr. Gupta and Dr. Philon or Philon. I don't know how I should pronounce your name, but I've heard about you, of course, both of you. So the thing that I was most interested in coming from India, I grew up there, is the fact that it happens to be such a society repellent with images. So you did speak about, Tiziana, about the fact that the Vīraśaivas did break up many images. So, and then also later you happened to show a bas relief where you had some of the other, but not representing gods, but some of their wars and battles. So my question really was, how important was the iconoclastic aspect of, because we know that that the Islamics, for example, they were very much into iconoclasm. It's part of their tenet. Was the iconoclastic aspect of the Vīraśaivas, or not important, marginal, or what? I mean, that's something that I was curious to know.
We can speak really of iconoclastic in the sense in which we know from the history, from Islamic, because they didn't there is not a forbidden written forbidden of worshipping images. They didn't go around to destroy images. Of course, we have seen some images in which they are destroying Jaina images, but it's not because they are images, but because they are fighting against Jains, and there is the problem is because the fight between different religious traditions. I think there is, we can say that there is an iconoclastic, just they don't use at the beginning images because they are not useful for the spiritual part, and they are not important, absolutely.
Thank you. And I do feel like I need to make a public service announcement on behalf of Islamic art historians that all Muslims are not iconoclasts, and
yes, exactly.
And this is not necessarily the case for, you know, this image of Muslims breaking up images is kind of we need to really question that. And there happens to be a great exhibition right now at the Rietberg on the status of the image in Islam. So just a note, I feel like I have to say that because of what I do. But we have another question from Prajval Shastri. They ask, was the pushback against Vīraśaivas tenets by Hindus or Brahmanical practice? Because it seems that these tenets really questions Brahmanical hegemony, mediators to God, and rituals and superstitions, whereas what Hindu means is more nebulous. I think, Professor Lorenzetti, I think this is a question about really what their relationship to the concept of Hinduism may have been. You know, could they have picked and choose, could they have sort of selected certain aspects of it? It's similar to the question that, that Professor Hegewald asked at the beginning.
The question related to why and if the Liṅgāyat Vīraśaiva, they took at a certain point, started to worship images, mostly Hindu images, is a very obscure question, and it deserves in-depth studies. We can only say that at a certain point there were changing in the Vīraśaiva Liṅgāyat beliefs. But we have to recall one important thing, that there is another minority tradition parallel to the one regarding Vāsava, the founder of the tradition, and this other tradition connect the origin of the Liṅgāyat, the Vīraśaivas, to 5 acharyas, 5 masters who had lived in Karnataka in mythical times. And this minority tradition seems used images, used to take over and reuse temples from other communities, religious communities. Now it's very difficult to detach this minority tradition that Blake Mitchell calls Guru Stalins. It seems that they had a different denomination, a monastic denomination, because they are blended together now. But Professor Kalburgi told that he thought that Vīraśaivas and Liṅgāyat were 2 different traditions, and this tradition that goes back to 5 masters regards to only the Vīraśaivas, nothing to do with the Liṅgāyat. But now they are blended together. So we can't understand why they started to worship images, Hindu images. I hope to have answered.
Thank you. We have one final question from Divya. It states, is there any mention of the linga being referred to as an Ishtalinga, Atmalinga, linga being the representation of the self or the soul?
Yes, there in many Sunya Sampadana, in many works mostly of the 15th century, there is this mention. Is the Ishtalinga, is the yes, is the alternative mentioned.
Okay, well, on that note, thank you, Professor Lorenzetti, for sharing your very deep knowledge of this very complicated topic with all of us, and Professor Hagevald for engaging with Tiziana. So please join me in thanking Professor Lorenzetti for this fantastic lecture.
Thank Professor Kalburgi. I lived with him for more than 1 month in his house, and he really taught me a lot. So I think that compliments goes to Professor Leila.
Yes, we always need to remember our teachers, especially those who have passed. And so our next lecture will be by Professor Julia A.B. Hagevald from the University of Bonn. And the title of her lecture is Reflections of Jaina and Vīraśaiva Interactions in the Art and Architecture of Karnataka. And it will be on June 3rd at 1 p.m. Thank you very much and see you next time.
We are looking forward to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye. Bye-bye.